Thank you for joining me. My name is Jenna Fortinsky, and welcome to my podcast, Simply Jenna. I am a registered psychologist and owner of Simply Counseling Services, a private counseling group in Calgary, Alberta. In working with my clients, I have noticed that I offer something different. The difference is simplicity and balance. I want to share that with you using this platform. Join me as we discover together how to keep it simple. Welcome back.
Hello.
Hello.
It's good to be here again.
Yes. What a break we had.
Yes, that's right. Exactly.
Although it doesn't seem like it was that long.
And so how are you doing, Jenna?
I'm good. We did take a little bit of a break. We released those 2 episodes about relationships and then decided to take a little bit of a break, partly because of the weather in Calgary.
Yes, it's been awful.
So cold.
Mm-hmm.
And partly because we wanted to give everybody a chance to catch up on what was already out there. So for me, I'm feeling rested.
Good.
And feeling like I just want this weather to go away.
Yes, definitely getting us a little bit of cabin fever.
Yes. Yeah.
Being stuck inside the house all the time.
Yes. But yeah, I feel like I'm ready to tackle the big kahuna today.
Ooh, this is a big one. It's a big one. We said that about relationships and expectations as well.
Yes.
But this is a big one, I think, for maybe different reasons, but
yes. So how are you doing, Nikki?
I'm good too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good. And I'm feeling like that break was awesome. So
yeah,
I'm ready to jump back into it now.
Okay. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Yes. Let's get on it. Okay. So today we're going to talk about anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So should we start with how we always start with, let's define it. Let's talk about a definition of anxiety.
Okay. And like always, I'll keep it simple.
Yes, please do.
So anxiety, for what we're talking about today, we're going to define it as worry or fear that interrupts your everyday routine.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. That sounds good.
So keeping in mind, we're keeping it very simple,
Yeah.
just so that we can talk about it in a very general sense for this podcast. But I think that's the best definition and for the purposes of what we're doing today.
Okay, perfect. So that's kind of our broad general definition of it. So then another way that we can sort of talk about it is to talk about the symptoms that usually go along with it. So how do we know that we're experiencing anxiety or that we have it? And there's sort of 2 different categories. There's physical symptoms and there's the mental symptoms. So do you want to give us some examples of each?
Yes. So physical symptoms. Ones that are commonly reported include sweaty palms, racing heartbeat, GI distress. So your tummy is upset in different ways.
Yep.
There's also like chest tightness, heartbeat is racing, and either like shaking or trembling, feeling lightheaded or excessive fatigue. So feeling really tired.
Okay.
So those are some of, but not limited to,
yes, of course,
all of the physical symptoms.
Yeah.
In terms of mental symptoms, so excessive worry. So worrying about either what's happened or what's going to happen. There's also racing thoughts. You can't concentrate. Feeling like you cannot shut your brain off. Your brain is just going and going and going. And again, the fatigue piece. So just feeling really tired, feeling like you just aren't motivated. So those are some of the mental symptoms.
Okay. And so one of the sort of distinguishing symptoms that you talked about for anxiety is the existence of worry. Mm-hmm. And so everybody experiences worry to some extent, right?
Yes.
It's part of your sort of normal everyday functioning. So what is the difference? Like, how do we categorize the difference between normal worry and excessive worry?
Very good. So very good question. We all experience worry, and we all worry about different things, or we all might worry about the same things. So when we talk about anxiety and we talk about it being an issue for somebody is when, like I said, it interrupts your ability to perform your daily tasks. So if your thoughts or your symptoms become so consuming that you're not able to, get out of bed, have a shower, eat your food, have a good sleep, concentrate while you're at work, all those things contribute to what we would characterize as anxiety in your life.
Okay. And that's to the point when it becomes excessive. Like that's when there's something potentially wrong in a sense that you might need to stop and look at it and think about accessing help for it. Okay. Yeah. So it's interrupting your daily routine, your daily functioning. Now you have something that is worthy of discussion.
Yes.
So what contributes to the worry becoming excessive then? How do we get to that point of the excessive worry?
So I like to talk to my clients about the connection between anxiety and avoidance. So anxiety and avoidance are best friends. They are really good chums. So the more we avoid, the more anxious we become.
Okay.
So a good example that I give my clients all the time, so my clients that are listening are probably thinking, here we go, is I think one that everybody can relate to is an example that maybe goes back to school and is really general. So if you are one of those people that happen to skip a class or two in school.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, neither do I. I did not do that. Is if you were to skip a class in school, maybe one or two, what you would notice is that if you skip the second class or maybe the third class, what happens is that our thoughts start to go to worry about returning to class.
Right.
So worry about, did the teacher or the professor notice that I was gone? What are they going to say to me? What did I miss out on? I don't know if I want to go back. And as you skip more classes, it gets harder to think about returning, and because a lot of our worries get in the way.
Okay.
So anxiety and avoidance are best friends.
Okay.
And so we'll talk about why there's a very specific treatment for anxiety that helps with that.
Okay.
We'll get there.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. That's a really good example. And I can definitely attest to experiencing that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like, I think everybody at some point in being the life of a student, you've skipped a class, probably, likely. So I can say that, from my own experience, that I can understand that feeling of how the worry can build up.
Yes.
The more that you miss and the more that you're in that state. And there's also a sense of fear that I think comes with that, because you're sort of fearful of, if the teacher did notice, does it mean that I'm going to get in trouble? There's a fear of, how's it going to impact my studies because now I've missed. So I can see there how that connection of fear also comes into play with that and with the overall anxiety feeling. And I think that's something that we tend to forget about when we're talking about anxiety, is the worry and the fear piece.
Yes. Yeah. And I think like even for people who have like maybe certain phobias or, or certain situations that they, intentionally avoid because of what they've experienced. Right. So again, going back to the avoidance and the anxiety, right? So the more we avoid that situation, that snake that we're afraid of, the bigger our anxiety comes around it. Right.
Okay.
So,
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And so what we're talking about right now are sort of those fears and those worries that we are actually aware of, that we're cognizant of.
Yeah.
Is that the only kind that exists?
No, my goodness, no. So definitely there is an element to conscious worry and unconscious worry. So conscious worry would be the stuff that we're talking about, so that I'm actually aware that I am afraid of snakes, or I'm worried about what my prof thinks because I skipped class, or I'm worried about what's going to happen when I go back to work, or I'm worried about possibly catching COVID-19. So those are all conscious worries. There are a lot of unconscious worries that happen for people that create a lot of anxiety that people just are maybe confused about or not understanding what's going on for them. And at the end of the day, it is anxiety.
Right.
And so what people will typically find is that they're having these physical symptoms that we've talked about, and it's manifesting in a way that your body is saying, hey, there's something going on for you. and you're maybe not aware that it's going back to anxiety, but it's our body's way of letting us know that there is some unconscious worry that's happening, and we need to maybe have a conversation or figure out what's happening there for us.
Okay. And that almost sounds like, and I can speak, I guess, from experience that typically when I've had anxiety, it's always been very specific.
Yes.
And it's very situational
Yes.
kind of anxiety. So I can tell you when I'm going to experience it.
Yeah.
So that sounds a little bit different. So is there a difference there? Is it possible that there's two different kinds of that anxiety as well that sort of couples with the unconscious and the conscious worry?
Yes. Yeah. So there's situational anxiety, like you said, is that you know exactly that when you see that snake, you're going to be anxious, right? Or you're going to have the symptoms that we've talked about. And then there's the generalized anxiety. So this is for the people that say, how come I have anxiety at random times and there's no common factor around it, right? I have it whether I'm laying in bed or I'm sitting in a movie theater or I'm having a romantic dinner with my partner. I'm all of a sudden having these anxiety attacks, right? Or having these symptoms that we talked about at the beginning of the episode.
Okay.
So that would be more of a generalized type of anxiety. And that typically falls under that bracket of unconscious processes that are happening that create those symptoms.
Things are happening behind the scenes.
Exactly.
We're not aware that it's happening, but our body is taking all of that information in and then spewing out in some sort of result, which maybe isn't the most comfortable feelings. Okay.
Yeah. So a true Wizard of Oz moment.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? Is that the little man behind the curtain is making everything happen, right? And we're not aware of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That is really helpful to explain it in that way. So should we talk then? We've sort of had a negative perspective so far, where we've been talking a lot about what it looks like, what it feels like.
Yes.
So should we switch gears and then maybe focus on now, how do we work with it?
Yes.
What is treatment in a broad sense look like? What are some good coping strategies? What is your advice for us? So
that's a big topic. So when we talk about what the research says is that, there's so many theories and so many different ways to approach how we treat anxiety, and they kind of fall under different umbrellas. So, one umbrella that we're talking about today is, to look at some coping strategies and starting to implement them into our daily routine to try and combat some of the, symptoms that we're experiencing. There's talk therapy. So going to see a professional and talking about your symptoms and finding strategies that are specific to you if you've tried the general ones and they're not working. There's medication. So medication is a hot topic. There's some people that are happy to take medication and there's people that are against it. I think the same goes for professionals, that there's probably professionals that support it and professionals that don't. So I think that there's different ways that we can tackle anxiety. And I think it's really just dependent on each individual person, but there's definitely strategies that we can talk about that people can try and implement into their routine, in a general sense, and see if it works for them. What's important to note, and we've talked about this a few times in the past episodes, is that when we talk about strategies and we talk about implementing them into your routine, what wins every time is the consistency.
Right.
So the strategies that we talk about today is that unless you're consistent with it, and it doesn't matter what your consistency is, daily, every other day, weekly, as long as you're consistent and you're teaching your brain that this is the strategy that's going to happen this often, that's how the strategies start to work.
Okay. So give us the answer. What are the strategies?
Okay, so there's, oh my goodness, I don't even know where
There's
to
too many.
start. There's so many.
That's a good thing.
Yes. So the first strategy that I think is maybe the easiest, and that's where I like to start with all of my clients, is to implement a 5-minute break at some point during your day.
Okay.
So choosing what time of day, like that has no impact on how successful it is. What has impact is a time of day that you can be consistent with and that you are able to teach your brain that it's going to happen no matter what. So that's what matters.
Okay.
So taking a break can look like literally just laying on your bed, looking at the ceiling and putting an alarm down for 5 minutes and just taking a break.
Okay.
So totally trying as much as you can to check out, and just taking that moment to, maybe do some deep breathing, do some meditation, listen to maybe, a guided meditation, if you're new to meditating, but just taking time every day to just plan to do nothing. So being purposeful about taking a break.
Okay.
Okay. So that's a good place to start. Another strategy is to maybe ramp up how many times a day you're doing that. So maybe you would do it 2 times a day instead of just 1. If you're noticing that it's working and it's giving you some good energy, maybe try doing it more during the day if you can. If you can make it happen.
Thank you for joining me. My name is Jennifer.
So other
Kinsky,
more
and
general
welcome to my
strategies
podcast,
that are
Simply
different than
Jenna.
that one. I like that one just
I'm a
because I think
registered
everybody can
psychologist
do
and
it and you
owner
can do
of
it
Simply
anytime,
Counseling Services,
anywhere.
a private counseling group
So
in
that's what I
Calgary,
love about
Alberta.
that strategy. And I try to give my
Working with
clients
my clients,
strategies
I
that
have
fall
noticed
under
that
that
I offer
bracket
something
because I don't want
different.
anybody to be
The difference
dependent
is
on
simplicity
anyone or
and
anything
balance.
when they're
I
using
want to share that
strategies.
with you
And you
using
don't want
this
them
platform.
to become anxious or
Join me
worried
as we
about
discover
having to
together
implement
how
the
to
strategies
keep it
that should be
simple.
fixing their anxiety, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why, when we talk about coping strategies, it is important that it doesn't rely on anyone or anything because those things have to be there for it to happen, right? So if we can make our strategies just about something that's inside of us or something we can do on our own, then it becomes much easier to access and much easier to implement. So the other strategies that I think of are deep breathing, right? So learning some sort of just YouTubing, what are some deep breathing strategies and finding a time during the day that's going to work best for you. If you know that you have a stressful day coming up or a situation that you're worried about, purposefully putting the deep breathing around that time so that you hopefully will feel more relaxed before you get into that situation.
So can I ask then maybe a harder question about
Yes.
what if you are a person like me who has situational anxiety?
Yes.
What are the strategies there? So I know that a particular circumstance or instance is going to trigger my anxiety. What can I do to sort of prep myself for going into that, for facing that challenge?
Yeah. So I think if you do some pre-planning, right? If you know that that situation is going to happen, if you're fortunate enough to know
Yeah.
before, then you can do some pre-planning. So you can say, okay, maybe 3 days out from that situation happening, I'm going to practice my strategies maybe 2 times a day. And then maybe 2 days out, you're 3 times a day. And then the day before, maybe you're doing it 4 times a day.
Okay.
Just to give your brain the ability to catch up and to realize, what's happening for you, right? And I think interestingly enough with anxiety is that when we think about anxiety, it gets worse.
Yeah. That was going to be my next question for you.
Yes.
Which is, what if I'm spending that time worrying?
So yes, then you will be anxious.
Okay.
Right? So worrying does cause anxiety. And when we think about how we felt when we're anxious, that causes anxiety.
Okay.
When we have little moments that feel like what we had when we had anxiety, then things are just going to spiral. Right?
Okay.
So anxiety is a big black hole.
Okay.
It's big, it's deep, it's dark. So when we talk about these strategies and we talk about, people having anxiety, it's important that if you are fortunate enough to have situational anxiety, and I'll say fortunate enough because the alternative is not great, then you can do pre-planning, which is good. And you can purposefully, take time, give your brain a break. And yes, you will have the anxiety outside of those 5-minute little blocks of not having anxiety, but your brain will at least get a break. You'll get a chance to regroup and then go back to worrying.
Okay. It sounds like you're speaking specifically to me in this episode.
Yes.
Okay. No, that's really helpful. Those are some really helpful tips. And so, and you just touched on this a little bit around sort of understanding what fuels anxiety, what contributes to it. Anxiety itself, kind of like, it's like that black hole, like you said, it's a cyclical thing where it sort of feeds into itself. So the more you think about it, the more it's going to happen.
Yeah.
What else kind of contributes to it? And what else, like, why do we get anxiety? Why does it happen?
That's a big question.
Yes, it is.
And I know when we put on social media that what people were interested in to find out about anxiety, that was one of the questions is where does it come from and how does it happen?
Right.
So obviously, like there's so many individual differences for that, right? And there is no one blanket answer for that.
Okay.
The couple things that I can say is that there are many things that contribute to anxiety. So you're not going to be able to contribute it to one specific thing unless we're talking only about fear.
Okay.
Right.
Gotcha.
So the fear
Yeah.
of snakes.
Yes.
I know for sure that snakes make me anxious, right? And they make me worried and I'm very fearful of them. So when somebody experiences anxiety, it's usually a multitude of things that are happening that's creating the anxiety, right? So, so when we're talking about having the symptoms that we talked about at the beginning of the episode, that's usually a result of many things that are happening in your brain, in your body, that's creating that feeling of anxiety for you.
Okay.
So there is no single cause. There's so many things that contribute to anxiety and fuel it and make it worse. The biggest thing that I think people need to know is that once you've experienced a little tiny bit of anxiety in your life, what happens is that when we experience that same feeling at another point in our life, usually it starts, the experience of those symptoms start to get more intense.
Okay.
So, if you have experienced that feeling of, I've got sweaty palms, my heart is racing, my chest is tightening, I can't turn my brain off, and you've experienced that once in your life, next time you start to have sweaty palms, your brain automatically goes to, oh my gosh, I think I know what this is. And I've felt this before. So then all those other symptoms appear.
So it's almost like your brain is building that connection between those experiences and forming that sort of pathway of this is how I responded the last time. This is how I'm going to respond again this time.
Exactly. So what I say to all my clients that have experienced, whether it's an anxiety attack or a moment of anxiety, or you have anxiety about, specific situations, is to try and adjust your life and live your life with strategies as if you were to experience anxiety every day.
Okay. So what does that mean?
So that means building strategies into your daily routine that actively combat your symptoms of anxiety.
Okay.
So that it helps that if you do experience a situation or you have a symptom of anxiety, your brain is better prepared to combat it because you've been practicing it all along.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So practice does make perfect. Yeah. The consistency is what wins every time.
Right. Okay. Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
I know I want to go back and talk about a little bit about medication, a little bit about talk therapy. So I think we should go there, right?
Sure.
What do you think of that?
I'm good with that. Take us there, Jenna. You're steering the ship.
Yeah. So medication. So yes, medication has a place and a time. It's not for everybody. But I think that if you are seeing a professional, whether it's a doctor or a psychologist or a counselor of some sort, and you guys have tried some strategies that, medication may be appropriate for you. What I do want to say is that it's ideal for medication to be short term.
Okay.
So the idea behind and what the research shows is that medication and talk therapy are supposed to go hand in hand. And that's the best way to combat anxiety or whatever you have going on for you. So medication should be short term. So please see a professional with your medication, learn the strategies, and transition off the medication. Okay. I think that that's very important for people to know because I think people go on medication for a long period of time when they don't need to be.
Right.
So you can learn strategies. You can live life without the medication in most cases, not all cases.
Yes.
But in most cases, you can learn strategies and get off the medication. So I just want everybody to know that that is a possibility and, to reach out to somebody that you trust or talk to your doctor about a referral. Or if you're going to do private, you don't need a referral, and get in and talk to somebody about strategies so that you can get off the medication. Again, not for everybody.
Right.
So when we talk about going to talk therapy and anxiety, is that there is a very specific treatment that has been proven to help with anxiety. And I kind of mentioned it at the beginning and said I would revisit it. And what we're talking about is exposure therapy. So exposure therapy is exactly what you think it is. We talked about anxiety and avoidance, that they're best friends. Yeah. So exposure therapy looks at how do we sit with the feelings that we're experiencing or the symptoms we're experiencing and teach our brain that, you know what, it's okay. I'm going to be okay. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit of a process, but it's there for people to help them. And again, that goes back to how do we transition off the medication and how do we get the strategies that work for us?
Okay. And I think when people think of exposure therapy, they usually associate it with fear, like fears. So person who's afraid of a snake, what do? You bring them to a snake and you actually expose them to it.
Yeah.
Right? And so this is following that same line of thinking.
Yeah.
Just in a little bit of in a different kind of a way. It's tweaking it a little bit, right? But you are using that same pattern of thinking of I'm going to expose you to it, therefore lessen the anxiety and the worry that comes with that concern.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's excellent. Sounds nerve-wracking.
It's nerve-wracking and it is a lot of work, but it's valuable work because it can be life-changing. And,
especially if you're a person that's living with that sort of debilitating anxiety, right? Where it's taking over your daily functioning.
Yeah.
So what, I guess then the strategies that you talked about have been excellent because you've given us the strategies for folks who are experiencing anxiety that's maybe you can't pinpoint and you can't say exactly this is what's causing my anxiety. So you've given those sort of those strategies that will help with that. And then you've also given us the strategies for that sort of situational specific anxiety experiences, right?
Yeah.
So that's awesome. So one last piece that I wanted to touch on before we do our wrap up for this episode is the connection between control and anxiety. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I think in the simplest way, anxiety is about not having control.
Okay.
So, a perfect example is the pandemic that's happening right now. Is there's so many unknowns and there's so many things that are out of our control, whether it's coming from the government or what our workplaces are telling us or the schools. So there's so many variables that are happening right now for everyone it's out of control. So it's creating a lot of anxiety for people.
Okay.
So I think the simplest way to create that connection is to say that a lot of anxiety has to do with a loss of control or feeling like you're not in control.
Awesome. Okay. So let's do a quick recap then, and then I will hand it back over to you to to see us through to the end of the episode. So to cover what we went through at the beginning, we talked about that sort of general definition of anxiety, that it is characterized by worry and fear. We gave a few examples of what the symptoms kind of look like and feel like. And there's both physical and mental symptoms, as we talked about. Then we touched on the difference between excessive worry and normal worry. And the key piece there being that excessive worry tends to impede on your daily functioning and your daily routine. We talked a little bit about anxiety and avoidance and how they're best friends.
Yes.
One fuels the other.
Yes.
And then we sort of dove into the black hole of anxiety, and what that looks like. Talking also about the sort of difference between generalized and situational anxiety, how there can be the two different experiences that also go hand in hand with that sort of unconscious and conscious worry.
Yeah.
You gave us a few really good coping strategies for both cases of if you are experiencing specific or situational anxiety, and then if you're experiencing sort of that generalized and more unconscious kind of experiences of anxiety. Anything else that you want to leave our listeners with before we close out?
I think just retouching again on the coping with anxiety and living your life as if every day you will experience anxiety. So very important that, you find a strategy that works for you. so that your brain is better prepared for when you do experience a little bit of anxiety. You have a strategy that works, and you're also working every day to combat it. So I think that's really important for all our listeners.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
You're
for
welcome.
a great episode.
Thank you. So we have another topic coming up. So the next episode will be about grief.
Okay.
So I think that's a very important topic given the last year that we've had with the pandemic and
absolutely
people's different experiences with grief. So we will close today's episode with a quote like we always do. So today's quote comes from actually a really good author, books that we both read her books, actually.
Yep.
So her name is Jodi Picoult, and she says, "Anxiety's like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you very far." Thank you for listening to this episode. I wanted to share some important information before we let you go. While this podcast will give you strategies to use in your life, it is certainly not a replacement for attending therapy or seeking your own support. There will always be limits to what we can do on our own when it comes to mental health. And while we can give you tools and strategies, we know that they will not always work for everyone. There is value in telling your story and being heard. If you have tried the strategies we discussed and you're still feeling stuck, please reach out to us at Simply Counseling Services. Visit our website at www.simplycounselingservices.com for the services we offer and to learn about the other services that are free. You can also submit your topic ideas for this podcast on this website as well. Thank you again for joining us, and we are looking forward to our next time together. Take care of yourself.